I wanted to do something different today, not for the purpose of doing it something different, but rather because there's a topic that I wanted to discuss. I wanted to speak about, I guess, literature, which includes a lot of philosophy and religion and just thinking about life. And some time ago, I read the biography, a masterpiece, I would agree, of Carson McCullers by Virginia Spencer Carr. I haven't really reviewed it very much lately, but I read it a few months ago. So I mean, the ideas are pretty fresh. I'm not going to talk too much about Carson McCullers. So I remember this author was from the same kind of area or town, and was very inspired in her research of Carson McCullers. And since most of my videos have to do with God, etc., things of that sort, and I've talked about COVID and other things like that, the present crisis we're in, I wanted to speak about the book that I just read of Carson McCullers, very famous, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. So that Carson was born in 1917 and wrote this book, her first novel, when she was 23. And so I have seen the movie several times, and during the time I was reading this book on Kindle, it is a rather long book, actually. The book itself is, I think, 356 pages. I read it on Kindle. The movie, of course, shortens a lot of stuff, but the essence is there, and the character of John Singer is what I want to talk about because it's been on my mind as really the embodiment of what this page from the biography says. And I'm actually going to read a good amount of it. So Carson, by this time, is in failing health. She will die at the age of 50. Just you know, she just turned 50 more or less. Her husband committed suicide in Paris, if I recall correctly, having invited Carson to join him, and she balked at that. But she is described here as having a lot of discipline with her work, always with a cigarette, smoking very little, and always with a thermos of hot tea with sherry. So she kind of drank all day. Famously, I read the biography also of Tennessee Williams. There's a scene, real life scene, where they're sitting together, maybe in Key West, I forget where, and they're both working on their respective books and exchanging a whiskey bottle between them. These writers, F. Scott Fitzgerald, etc. I'm reading about him a lot. Drank. And one of the things that F. Scott Fitzgerald regretted was that a point arrived in his short life. He died at 40. I've been reading Sheila Graham's, memoirs of their relationship. He regretted that he no longer could drink and write, as many other, rock stars, etc. Probably got very high to compose and to play, and maybe that doesn't last as long as they would like. I think in one of my programs, I actually quoted the John Huston uh, saying that he said uh, that I used to, have a, wild night and have a night's sleep and pick me up and go on from there. I can't do it anymore, etc. I lack the imagination to conceive of ever having to pay the price, and I am sure as hell doing that now. So I'm very much attracted to biographies, and I've read a lot of them and continue to do so. Uh, I'm just fascinated with human beings. I've read a lot of saints' biographies, but I've also read a lot of biographies of outsiders and freaks and people that didn't fit in. And this is exactly what this page is referring to. So that in spite of her efforts, Carson realized from the beginning that she was struggling with every page. I think they're referring to her writing of a book called The Bride, which I am not familiar with. As the bright autumn leaves dropped and a cold, damp Columbus winter set in, so too did her spirits. She reasoned that the trouble was that she could not pray. She admitted that she had always felt a need to be close to God, yet for many months, years in fact, she had ignored him. As she struggled now with her new book, she experienced a heightened sense of loss of her creative powers, an uncontrollable sluggishness which seemed inextricably bound to her awareness of divine deprivation. Carson felt certain that her inability to proceed well with The Bride was symptomatic of her greater spiritual loss. She longed to pray, she told Newton Arvin. She had rewritten the first part of the novel 5 times, yet still did not have the timber. If only God would help, she exclaimed, but instead she felt a sense of abandonment, a loss of God and godliness, which haunted her intermittently much of her life. Although deeply religious in a natural sense, Carson had accepted since age 14 that the fact that her Christian beliefs must of necessity be divorced from church or dogma. She recognized God as an omniscient being, a supreme creator who imposed order on the universe, but she sometimes saw him as a capricious deity whose specialty was freaks. Laboring now with The Bride, Carson created Honey Brown, the fair-skinned son of Big Mama, who described her offspring as a boy God had not finished. The Creator had withdrawn his hand from him too soon, and so he had to go around doing one thing and then another to finish himself up. Just as in the heart is a lonely hunter, reflections in a golden eye, and the then unpublished The Ballad of the Sad Cafe, and I have read all these books, the young author again depicted an inverted, nightmarish world, a World War II world, which a deterministic God had peopled with fragmented beings, unhappy grotesques who realized that their destiny was to achieve no lasting joys or satisfaction. They formed a community of pariahs. When Klaus Mann had looked into Carson's eyes the first time they met, he recognized her instantly as a wanderer, he said, just as other sensitive artists intuitively knew and identified with the exile. Each lonely character in Frankie Adams' world was locked inexorably in a realm which barred fruitful communion. I think this Frankie Adams is from a Member of the Wedding, which is a book have only sort of started. I mean, I've started it, not I don't know, maybe I've even read it. I forget. But both A Ballad of Sad Cafe and Reflections in a Golden Eye, what a title, um, are also movies. Reflections with Marlon Brando and Ballad with Vanessa Redgrave. So I've read the biography of one of my favorite authors, Thomas Hardy, another melancholy person as I am. And he had this idea very similar that God as a sort of a deistic idea. God kind of wound the clock and then let it uh, do its thing without being too involved in the world. And in fact, basically, sort of looking the other way at all the suffering and madness there is. Theologically, you could say it's human beings' fault, but I remember, really posting on Facebook a good while back, much before COVID, that I felt people were so distracted and so superficial and lost and not paying attention that I shuddered to think what it would take to get people to focus. I never imagined COVID. And here we are a year and a half into COVID, and 45% of America has not had its full vaccine. A quarter probably will refuse to have the vaccine. Smart people are, good hardware, bad software, are saying that there's different points of view. I talked to a dear friend yesterday, or maybe former dear friend, and she was mentioning this doctor that said that it's not true that unvaccinated people are breeding grounds for mutations of the virus. He was saying the opposite. I said that's a voice crying in the wilderness. You can get somebody to say anything, even if he's an expert. She was saying, "Oh, he was the guy that discovered HIV or something." I go, who cares? I listen to all these university people all the time, every day, and this is a big crisis that we need to focus on, and we still don't do that. So I wanted to speak about, not lecture or preach about that anymore right now, but I wanted to speak about The Heart is a Lonely Hunter and how that book and movie, the movie's wonderful, I think. Alan Arkin plays the Jewish main character who is a deaf mute. Carson's original title was The Mute, and somebody came up with The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, just like Reflections in a Golden Eye originally had a very unimaginative title. Maybe Carson was not great at titles, and her editors or other people gave her the great titles. But the movie is and the book is incredibly interesting as an embodiment of what this page says. You have a man, very neat, disciplined man who apparently has no family and cannot really, he's barred from fruitful communion, just like this page says. He's an exile, a pariah who is destined to never achieve lasting joy or satisfaction. So John Singer, Jewish, she's chosen a Jew. She's also, chosen this angry black doctor, played by Percy Rodriguez, Dr. Copeland, who only attends to his own people, deeply angry, and with a lot of reason in the South, especially against whites. But he gets along with John Singer. So John Singer tries to be very polite always and as helpful as he can. He cares about others, but being mute, especially in a relatively small town in the South, he's not accepted as a normal person. He is looked at on as a freak. He's well dressed, immaculately dressed. His profession is a silver engraver in a jewelry store. And the only friend he has is an odd bedfellow, so to speak. It's Spiros Antonopoulos, who is a fellow deaf mute, but quite the opposite of John Singer. Spiros uh, loves to eat and drink and engage in a private pleasure, the book says. This is not mentioned in the movie. And the movie starts with this guy unable to control the food or the cake he's seeing in this behind this, display window, and he breaks the window to eat. He can't control his appetites. So he's arrested, and of course, John Singer bails him out and wants to take care of him, even maybe adopt him, because the cousin of this deaf mute, with great appetites, a little bit almost nuts, really doesn't want to have anything to do with him beyond employing him. But when Spiros gets too much out of hand, he wants to institutionalize him. And apparently, John Singer tries to prevent that by becoming the person in charge, the guardian of this guy. But I'm not too clear on how come that didn't work, or he's not family, so the family prevailed and they institutionalize Spiros. So now John Singer is deprived of the one friend he has had, as dissimilar, as different as these two guys are. They could at least communicate in the book and in the movie, but the book talks a lot about how eager this John Singer was to speak with his hands, of course, sign language. He wanted to blurt out all this stuff in his head, which no one could understand except this one deaf mute. John Singer could understand everybody by lip reading when he chose to look at them, which was usually the case. He could choose to not listen by not looking at the lips. He does that once or twice. But when he loses his one friend that he can talk to, uh, John Singer, with all this discipline and trying to put the best face forward, trying to help people, trying to reach out. He lives in a rooming house, which is rented. They rent out rooms. He takes in this belligerent drunk, Jake Blount, if I'm pronouncing it right. He goes out of his way to be nice and to be accepted and maybe even loved. I don't think this is ever explicitly mentioned. Now there's a a girl named Mick Kelly, who is a dreamy girl, I think 14, but wise beyond her years, more or less, dreaming of faraway places, escape from this little constricted town, trying to maybe be somebody, be a musician. She loves, classical music. And John Singer helps her with all that. He takes her to a concert, or at least she sits outside a concert. He buys the album that the concert played, live, so that she can come to his room and listen to the music that he himself cannot hear. But he enjoys and is happy with Mick Kelly loving this music that he has bought for her to listen to. And so you have all these events, all the great suffering of blacks and of violent, racist people in this town. There's a black servant, I guess, in the Kelly household who has a brother and a husband, and I believe it's her husband that gets arrested because obviously when there's a fight, even though it's started by other people, the blacks are gonna get the blame, and they put ankle, cuffs or whatever it is around his ankles too tightly, and he gets gangrene and he becomes a double amputee. So there are scenes of incredible injustice and suffering in the book and in the movie. The movie not as powerfully as the book, and you get this really literature about how Carson feels, which I think she is going to express through John Singer, at least in a literary way. She longs to pray, but finds that God doesn't seem to care or want to help. She feels abandoned. She doesn't feel close to God. And she thinks that God takes special delight in freaks. If you think of the Ballad of the Sad Cafe, which is a heck of a title, and I think I was assigned this, pretty sure I was, I don't know whether I read it back then, I read it later, University of Florida, my first year, 1971. If you see the movie, but the book is also very good, you have this woman, very tough woman, who befriends a freak dwarf, as I recall, and is really nice to this guy, a little bit like the John Singer Spiros relationship. You have a disciplined, orderly man who allows into his life the disorder of a very undisciplined, unruly, wild guy that can't control his appetites. So the Vanessa Redgrave character, I forget the name, invites this dwarf, sort of deformed guy, and gives him free reign to do what he wants, and he's her buddy. But then a bad guy comes in, and to make a long story short, there's going to be a duel, a fisticuffs duel, a fight, scheduled fight between this woman who's very strong and this belligerent man. And as she is, I think, getting the upper hand in the fight, who of all people jumps on her back to impede her winning but the freak hunchback dwarf to whom she has been so nice? It's a heck of a betrayal. And as I recall, I read the book a lot later than I saw the movie, so I recall it a little bit more. But I read it a couple of years ago now. And I don't remember everything really well all the time. After that, she was not the same. She had lost all, uh, illusion with living. She said, after what has happened, the betrayal that I have suffered, she kind of, I forget, it ends on a very bad note. I forget what the unraveling of her life was now, but definitely it's another example of these kinds of things. And Reflections in a Golden Eye is another kind of a strange characters in that one. But getting back to The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, you have this John Singer guy uh, trying his best to have some communion, to fit in some way, and it's just not possible. He's laden with gifts, wrapped, to go to see this friend of his who's institutionalized. He's gone one time to see him, and then he comes back a second time. He has been writing to this guy, but this guy doesn't write back. And when he goes to the institution, he learns that his friend has died. And as I read in the book, John Singer is not only shocked, but it's really the end for him. He's done with the suffering and the lack of communion, barred from fruitful communion, locked inexorably in a realm which barred fruitful communion. That's why this biography is a masterpiece. As I recall, the book says he left his luggage at the station. And basically, he goes back to his rooming house where his, friend Mick Kelly lives with her father and mother and brothers, etc. And she hears a shot, and still dressed up, lying in bed, John Singer has shot himself in the chest, says the book. So that this is a tale of a good man who was like this boy God had not finished, a man not equipped to speak or hear, and therefore destined to be a freak. He did go around doing one thing and then another, trying to finish himself up. He would, share his music. He was the interpreter for a deaf mute that Dr. Copeland had. Of course, he had this friend that he visited, etc., even though they were so different. When he died, he was quite lamented, mourned in this town. The book doesn't end like the movie. The movie ends with Mick Kelly going to his tomb to speak to him. Mick Kelly, the girl, wants to talk to him even though he's in the tomb, like she can talk to no one else, because he always listened and listened and listened and seemed to understand everything. This is made very explicit in the book. Just with his attention and the wisdom in his eyes, etc. Everybody, including that belligerent drunk Jake Blount, I think, They said, this is the only guy that understands me. He's the only guy that understands my politics, for example. Very radical politics are expressed in the book about injustice and basically socialistic views and things on racism, etc. Very radical social political agenda or views. So the movie ends with Mick Kelly going to the tomb and then seeing that Dr. Copeland, this guy who hates whites, um, he says, I come here basically daily now. So he has a need to be close to John Singer after he's dead. The book ends differently with Jake Blount saying, I'm staying in the South, but I'm getting out of this particular town and I don't know what lies ahead or something. But the interesting thing to me about the book is, and this page about God and a community of pariahs, and recognizing a wanderer or an exile. So I think that this is a very relevant feeling, a feeling that people can identify with quite a lot uh, in this country and maybe even in the world. And when I get into these books, I heard somebody say the other day, I think it was Scott Fitzgerald, somebody, you know, when you read these things, you say you're not alone. Some author thought all these things, lived, felt all these things, and then wrote about them in a sense that does establish this communion. Hopefully, fruitful communion. Even this video could be in some way fruitful communion with people that might be interested. Maybe they Google or they look up Heart is a Lonely Hunter or Lonely Hunter, Carson McCullers or something, and they find these, 30 some minutes. I'm not going to go much longer. This reflection on this thing. But, and certainly people identify with this desire for God and inability to really feel a great help. And I am not one of those persons with facile, easy cliches on this or that or the other. I can identify quite a bit with these freaks who think that the deity was capricious in not giving them, either sight or speech or hearing. I think I've mentioned in one of these programs, I'm also reading about Helen Keller quite a bit. And I'm reading her book. I think it was originally titled My Religion. I'm reading an updated version that has some maybe extra stuff, but it's really the same thing she wrote back in the 20s. But she kind of went off into Swedenborgianism. And Swedenborg was, had visions of angels revealing new stuff to him, just like, a little bit like Joseph Smith and the Mormons. This is not really my cup of tea. I find it unbelievable and escapist and just delusional. But it's interesting that somebody as smart and as tried as Helen Keller, who was voracious in her desire to know, once she discovered that words exist and words were the way that she could have thoughts in a world where she could see nothing and hear nothing. She tried to be able to speak to others, and with not great success in being in understood. I mean, she didn't know how to pronounce like for people to understand her very well most of the time. But she finds this. she rejects. She's also got a very good social, very liberal, progressive, the poor and all these things. Um, People laugh about it, but that's Jesus. He got crucified. That's another story. But Helen went off into this a sort of new church of Swedenborg, Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish great scientist, but then become a theologian. And I consider that to be some sort of, I guess, transporting yourself to a realm that is a little bit escapist, or at least very rosy kind of picture, I think, as an antidote to a very dark life, but for these kinds of, and she says, this is the light that came to my life, light in my darkness. I think that's the title of the new edition that I'm reading. It changed from my religion to light in my darkness. And really the light is, Jesus Christ and the faith, but through the teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg, who had these, angels revealing him about how loving and merciful God is, etc. She found solace in that. So that's a heroic person, in my view. But in the case of Carson McCullers and her character John Singer, uh, it was not that happy. There was no lasting joy or satisfaction. I think Helen Keller was quite joyful, an unbeatable optimist and positive person, a great heroine, really. But I don't think Carson was like that. And this character is quite a depiction of a man, a person, unable to establish communion. Perhaps through no ultimate fault of his own. He was made that way. And so, sadly, his solution, his escape, unlike Helen into, I hate to offend anybody, Swedenborgianism, his escape was a shot in the chest. As others in the movie escape by drinking, etc. Bad forms of escape, but nevertheless unbearable lives, or at least lives that are unbearable because of the inability of the sufferer to bear them. Maybe a hero could bear these difficulties. John Singer was just deaf and mute. Helen Keller was also blind. Totally different outcomes. But nevertheless, I think, at least in my view, compassion and empathy would have us not condemn or maybe even criticize these people who are trying one thing and another because they have been badly made, or the software they received, even if the hardware was pretty good, the software made it not function right. Just like when a computer gets a virus or some other thing that causes it to not function well. And so I wanted to share these reflections. I found this connection with when I was a teenager and an early, a young adult, and I struggled with God, and I still sometimes do. I wanted to share these reflections on what I got out of reading the book after seeing the movie several times. The heart is a lonely hunter wanderer. And with that, I can stop.